You may have noticed there's been a bit of weather. There always has been, as long as I've been alive. There's weather, and sometimes it's good weather, and sometimes it's bad weather. The latest place to have particularly bad weather has been Dunedin and down south, with floods and extreme weather. And, of course, we have seen the normal raft of stories blaming this on man-made climate change and dire warnings from experts all over the country. Oh, you're going to see more of this. This is because, our carbon isn't down. I think Greenpeace are having another crack at Fonterra about methane. But once again, I wonder how much of this is just a very lazy compliance with the climate hysteria narrative and whether or not these experts are telling us the truth. And I always find on this issue, one of the best people to talk to is investigative journalist Ian Wishart. He joins us on the line now. How are you, Ian?
G'day, Sean. How's things?
Very good, mate. Though I am now again starting to get anxious about global warming and climate change because I'm told that Dunedin was all part of it.
Yeah, I've had there's complaints into RNZ and TVNZ as we speak, 4 against RNZ so far. The issue with Dunedin is that the media came out on Friday because of a NIWA tweet which was misleading at best and dishonest at worst. NIWA tweeted at mid-morning on Friday the 4th that the rainfall for the 24 hours to 9 a.m. on Friday out of 131 millimetres was a record for Dunedin (Musselburgh) in over a century. Musselburgh refers to their rain gauge down there.
Yep.
One Dunedin suburb. It's got a footprint the size of a small bucket, so it's not a great measure of the overall rainfall across Dunedin, but it's one target out of it.
Yeah.
So the media quickly climbed on it. RNZ and TVNZ and the rest of them all climbed on it, saying Dunedin's wettest day in over a century. This was despite me putting RNZ on notice hours earlier that Dunedin's record rainfall in 24 hours was actually 279 millimetres, which is more than double what fell on Friday last week. And that was back in 1929, and then 229 millimetres of rain in 1923. So there have been 2 massive storms in the early 1920s that really seriously flooded Dunedin and had a much higher rainfall than the one we endured last week, which isn't to take anything away from what Dunedin's going through. But it's to put it in perspective. And as I said to RNZ in the complaints that I filed, we're in the business, in the news business, of selling facts. Facts actually matter. And it was considered important enough for all these media to run around saying Dunedin's wettest day, all day Friday and most of the weekend, when it turns out it's not true. In fact, the irony is that in the Dunedin case, the record is only the wettest day in 9 years. It turns out that 2015's floods were at 175 millimetres in 24 hours. Were higher again than Friday. So NIWA, and this is the irony, NIWA didn't know about it in its supercomputer data that it used for its tweet in saying over a century. But NIWA's historic website said 2015, 175 millimetres.
Oh, God. So, they were contradicting themselves.
They're contradicting themselves. So RNZ bleat to me, they haven't corrected it yet, but RNZ bleat to me yesterday afternoon was, we can't make any changes until NIWA get back to us with the data. And I said to them, you're seriously trusting NIWA still after all this embarrassment it's caused you? It's just unbelievable.
It is amazing. Ian, do you think there's any way to stop this, tide of bad journalism? Because you sit here and I think pretty dispassionately and pretty straightforwardly call this stuff out. We run it whenever we can, when we've got time in between other stuff, but still it happens. And I suppose in many ways that's why people are losing faith in mainstream media. But it seems hard-baked into our legacy journalists that this is the story, and despite the facts, we will not deviate from it.
Yeah, it is burnt into them, and that's why this time I decided to do something different and file formal complaints to the BSA and the Media Council, or via the media organisations first, because it forced them to, in reading the complaints, they actually have to wade through the evidence. And so it wasn't hard for me to pull up a bunch of storms in Dunedin over the last century that are much bigger than the one that we had last weekend.
Yeah.
And make the media at RNZ and TVNZ read those links, look at the old newspaper clips and read what NIWA has gotten wrong over the last few years. And they're forced to confront the evidence that otherwise they just ignore. So, and for RNZ and TVNZ, this is an unwinnable fight for them on the Dunedin case, because quite plainly it was not the largest rainfall in Dunedin in the century, not by a long shot. They can't win this argument, and therefore the journalists are going to have to eat humble pie, issue an apology, and correct it.
Yeah, and perhaps be more rational and unbiased in future, Ian. I mean, that's what we've got to hope for.
Yeah, well, it's like the kids are taking control of the newsrooms. They are so wedded to the idea of climate change as an end-all narrative that anything that pushes that narrative along is given prominence, and they will just turn a blind eye to conflicting evidence. And this is the danger. You know, you have to go where the evidence leads. You can't just sit there and say, I'm not going to look at this. One of the things I did as an author in confronting the stories that I did is I always played devil's advocate with myself. So I looked for the best arguments that my opposition could throw at me and researched them myself to see if I could disarm them in the first instance. The modern media are not doing that. They're not playing devil's advocate with their own story theses. They're just simply going off one narrative and then getting burnt by it.
Ian, this isn't unusual to New Zealand. Hurricane Milton, or Cyclone Milton, it's hurricane, I think, is about to hit Florida. One imagines there will be, as there always are in extreme weather events, dramatic photos and roofs flying off, and reporters for cable news networks stand out there getting blown over or holding on to power poles. And that will again, I'm sure, be framed in the States and indeed globally and on social media as a man-made climate change event.
It will be, and it isn't. The reality is that Tampa has been overdue for a major hurricane. This last one was about 100 years ago. It got hit also in the 1840s by a big hurricane, but Florida was actually hit by so many hurricanes in the 1800s that the place wasn't really settled until the early 1900s in any meaningful sense, because every time they built something, hurricanes wandered in and destroyed the cities. I mean, there's a hurricane in 1926 that took out a 20-story building in Miami. So they have a history in the cold, low-carbon past of big storms sweeping across the Florida peninsula and destroying whatever's in its wake. The key thing with hurricanes is the low-pressure storm surge. What that means is that the hurricane acts like a giant robot vacuum cleaner, and it sucks air out of the middle of it, which is up the eye. And by sucking air up the middle of the eye of the storm, it makes the pressure over the sea less, and that means the sea level can rise. Now, the storm surge is what they're talking about with Milton. They're expecting a storm surge of 10 to 15 feet, which is between 3 and 4 metres of storm surge. To put that in perspective, the world record for hurricane storm surge is held by Australia, Cyclone Mahina in 1899, which created a storm surge of 14 metres, which is 46 feet, which is enough to submerge a 4-storey building. So these storms, although they're big, and of course when you look at Florida, it's low-lying. So a 15-foot storm surge across Florida can do a lot of damage. And if you stay on that pathway, you're going to need a boat, which is why they're saying it could be unsurvivable for some people if they choose to stay. But the reality is it's routine for that area. The Gulf dishes up some big hurricanes. Katrina is an 8-metre storm surge, which is bigger again than Milton. It's just the hazard of living in an area where hurricanes form. Yeah. So it's not climate change. It's not climate change fueled. It is just what it is.